Hi children, I am going to start a new lesson and the title of the lesson is Democracy, an Evolving Idea. Democracy, an Evolving Idea. What are the main features of democratic government that we are going to learn in this lesson? And to start with, democracy means responsible government. Now let us see how it is responsible government. Actually, democracy means people's rule. And it is a system in which people elect their representatives in the elections, and then these elected representatives, they rule the country on behalf of the people. And because they are elected by the people, these elected representatives, they are answerable to the people and they are responsible to the people. And that is why democracy means responsible governments, because government is elected by the people. The elected representatives are answerable and responsible to the people. And already we have seen in previous chapter how in Libya the ultimate power was lying with the RCC, Revolutionary Command Council. And it was not elected by the people, but the ultimate power was with the RCC. And there were elected assemblies and councils also which were elected by the people in Libya. But these assemblies and councils were given the power only to implement the decisions of the RCC. RCC used to take all the decisions. And this RCC was self-appointed. It was appointed by the Gaddafi's government. And all the decisions were taken by the RCC, and these decisions were only implemented by the elected representatives who were elected by the people. And that is not democracy. Democracy means people only elect their representatives through elections by exercising their right to vote, and then because the governments are elected by the people, the governments are responsible to the people, they are answerable to the people. For all their actions, for any step taken by the government is responsible to the and answerable to the people. Now let us see the elected government's function is, that is the elected representatives who are elected by the people through elections, they are answerable to the people in three ways, mainly in three ways. Of course, in different ways they are answerable, but here we will discuss about the three main ways in which they are answerable to the people. First of all, there are elected assemblies. At central level it is Lok Sabha, and at state level it is state legislative assemblies. And in these assemblies, the elected representatives, they will be asked to explain their work, what they are going to do for the welfare of the people. And they have to explain their plan of work. In these elected assemblies, that is in Legislative Assembly or Lok Sabha, the members who are elected by the people, they are asked to explain their plan of work. And if the members of the assemblies are satisfied with this plan of work, the government can carry on. And secondly, any citizen has a right to demand information from any of the government departments in India regarding their functioning. If we have any doubt, we can ask information from any government department, and that is through RTI, Right to Information. This act was passed in 2005, and now it is a fundamental right of each and every citizen to get information from any government department regarding their functioning. If we have any sort of doubt, we can ask information from the government, and the government is answerable. The government department should furnish the information which is required by the citizens. And thirdly, as you know, in democracy, at a regular period of intervals, the elections are held. That is to say that in India, once in every 5 years, elections are held. And in these elections, people elect their representatives. And these representatives rule the country on behalf of the people. And if in these 5 years period, the people are not satisfied with the functioning of the government, with the welfare programs which are implemented by the government, then the people have the right to reject this government in the next elections. The people have every right to reject this government in the next election. That is, again, they have a weapon in their hands. That is right to vote. Right to vote is always a weapon in the hands of the people. And by using this weapon, they can reject the government in the next elections. If they are not satisfied with the plan of work of one party, that party can be rejected in the next elections and the people can go for other alternatives which can satisfy their needs, which can implement more effective programs for the welfare of the people. Now that is to say that the democracy means responsible government. Now, democracy is based on equality and inclusiveness. Now let us see how it is based on equality. When we say democracy means, generally we say it is people's rule. People's rule means all the people are included in that word. People's rule means not only men, not only adults, not only women, not only rich, not only poor. All the people who are adults, whether they are men or women, rich or poor, black or white, Hindus or Muslims, Christians, maybe they belong to any religion or they speak any language, all are people only. And to establish this fact, it took long time. That people means all the people, irrespective of their caste, creed, religion, language, all are considered as people in a democracy because all are equal. Now let us take the example of right to vote in the elections. To have more clarity, let us take the example of right to vote in the elections. For example, this right to vote in elections was not given to all the people at a time, including Western countries, starting from the Western countries like USA, England, France, Switzerland. In all these countries, right to vote was not given to all the people irrespective of caste, creed, religion and gender. In the beginning, initially it was only given to propertied men. There were only few propertied men and only those few propertied men were given the right to vote, to participate in the elections by voting. And slowly this right was extended to poor men also. That means those who are not rich, they were also only men. They were also given the right to vote. And then after struggling for many years, the right to vote was extended to women also. And ultimately, all the people who are adults and who are eligible to exercise their right to vote, they were given the right to vote. And that is called as universal adult franchise. And for example, USA allowed white women to vote only in 1920. That means women were given the right to vote in USA only in 1920. And the black citizens in USA, they were given the right to vote only in 1965. That means in 1965, universal adult franchise was implemented in USA. That means all the people, irrespective of their caste, creed, religion and gender, they were given the right to vote in USA only in 1965. And the first nation to allow voting rights for all groups of people without any discrimination, it was New Zealand. In 1893, it allowed universal adult franchise in its country. And there also, women and the black people, they led a struggle to achieve this universal adult franchise. And the first large country to give universal adult franchise was Russia, USSR. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, universal adult franchise was implemented in Russia. And even today there are many countries which are making laws to discriminate against some communities. That means some communities are still not given the right to vote. Now for example, in Estonia, it is a country, it has made its citizenship rules in such a way that people belonging to Russian minority, some of the Russians, they settled in Estonia and these are in minority, less in population. So they are called Russian minority. This Russian minority, they are not given the right to vote. In Estonia, the right to vote is given to only the original inhabitants of Estonia. And the Russian minority, the Russian people who settled in Estonia, they are finding it very difficult to get the right to vote. And in Fiji, it is an island country, the electoral system is such that the vote of an indigenous Fiji, that means an original inhabitant of Fiji, who is originally living in Fiji, his vote has more value than that of an Indian Fiji. If an Indian migrates to Fiji and settles there, he is Indian Fijian. And the vote of an indigenous Fiji has a more value than that of an Indian Fijian. And only from 2013 elections onwards, an equal right to vote is being implemented in Fiji. That means all have equal rights to vote. That means all votes have equal value also. And democracy is based on the fundamental principles of political equality. Political equality means one person, one vote, one value. Each person should have one vote and all the votes should have the same value. And in a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. Now, democracy requires active participation of citizens. Now, let us see how it requires and what is it. Often, democracy means people electing their representatives through elections, and these representatives rule the country on behalf of the people. And actually, democracy means not only electing the representatives but also participating in making policies and laws. Not only electing the the responsibility of the people is not over with electing the representatives. They have to participate in making the policies for the country, and also in implementing the policies also they have to take an active part. And this is possible when all the policies and laws in the country are made after thorough discussion with the public, so that they can also express their opinions and suggestions if any. And by forming independent citizens committees, people can participate in making policies and also in their implementation. Only by forming into independent citizens committees, people can participate in making policies and also in their implementation. Of course, this type of participation is not so easy. Actually, governments of many countries, they do not encourage people to participate in any policy making or implementation. In fact, the government tries to prevent it. It does not encourage people. Moreover, it tries to prevent the people from taking part. More often, people also do not show much interest in public affairs. For example, in the presidential elections of USA in 2012, more than 40% of the people did not exercise their right to vote. That means they did not vote at all. This shows that people have no interest in participating in public affairs. Democracy requires civil liberties. Now let us see what are these civil liberties. People can participate, just now we discussed about taking part in the making of policy decisions. And people can participate in decision making only if people have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to discuss with others, to form independent opinions, to form independent associations and discuss different things, and freedom of press. If all these are given to the people, these freedoms are given to the people, then only they can participate in decision making and also in the implementation of the decisions. And these are called civil liberties: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to form associations, and freedom of press. These are called civil liberties. And governments of many countries, they want to control the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of forming into associations. All these civil liberties are controlled by the government. They are not granted to the people. They are controlled by the government. Most government decisions are kept secret from the people. Whatever decisions are taken by the government, those decisions are kept secret from the people. And the newspapers and the books are also, they are censored. That means they cannot publish any news which goes against the government. And it is not allowed to be published in the newspapers. If any news or information is against the government, it is not allowed to be published. And people were not allowed to form any political parties also, or trade unions or organizations of their own choice. But only one party or officially sponsored parties were allowed to function. And that is why in USSR for many years, for more than 60 years, USSR functioned only with one party. There was one party system. For over 60 years, there was only one party. They had to put up with one party rule for nearly 60 years. And even today, these rights are not available to people in all the countries. Only in few countries, these civil liberties are granted. Now let us see what is the use of these civil liberties? If restrictions are imposed on these civil liberties by the government, it helps the governments to remain in power. But that means if restrictions are imposed, any news or information which is against the government cannot be published, and they can freedom of speech is not given to people. Even if they are not satisfied with the government, they cannot express it. Freedom of expression will not be there. Nothing can be published in the newspapers against the government, even if the people are not satisfied. So, if restrictions are on civil liberties are imposed by the government, it helps the governments to remain in power for longer time. And if these are granted to the people, if they are not satisfied with the present government, immediately they have the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. They will speak out. And the government cannot remain in power for longer time. Thus, civil liberties, restrictions on civil liberties help the governments to continue in power for longer time. Now, democracy requires equality. Political as well as social and economic equality is required in democracy. Now let us see what is this political equality. Already we have discussed. If there is only political equality means one person, one vote, one value. All the people who are eligible should have right to vote, and all the votes should have the same value. And this political equality, to be more effective, it requires social equality and economic equality also. That means if the society, suppose the society is divided into higher and lower classes, rich and poor, higher caste and lower caste, Dalits like, then political equality becomes meaningless. If there are social and economic inequalities in the society, the political equality becomes meaningless. Now let us see how it becomes meaningless. Those who are rich, they can influence the poor people to vote for a candidate of their choice. Because these poor people, they are inferiors, and they are forced by the rich people to vote for a candidate of their choice. In the same way, higher caste people may influence the lower caste people to vote for a candidate of their choice. In the same way, higher class people and high caste people, they can influence the lower caste people. High class people, they can influence the lower class people to vote for a candidate of their choice. Here you can see that political equality becomes meaningless. How should we exercise our right to vote? We should elect a candidate of our own choice. Then it is political equality. But if we are electing a candidate of others' choice, it is not political equality. Though we have right to vote, we are exercising our right to vote, it is not political equality. Thus we can see that without social and economic equalities, political equality becomes meaningless. And in many of the countries like USA, most of the media are owned by the rich people. And whatever the rich people say, the media will publish that news. And thus, most of the rich people, they have easy access to the legislatures and members of the legislature and also parliament. They can have an easy access to the members of the legislature and the parliament. So they can influence those people. They can influence their policies and programs also. Whereas poor people do not have such access to the legislatures or the parliament or ministers. So they cannot influence the policies and programs. So ultimately we can say that political equality without social and economic equality is meaningless. It is effective only when there is social and political equality. And as I told you, the poor and the illiterate people, they cannot have such access to the government circuits, like they cannot reach the legislature members or the ministers so easily as the rich people can reach. So they cannot influence the politics or the policies and programs of the government. Now democracy requires free and fair elections. Now let us see what are these free and fair elections. If people of a country have to really choose the best and the genuine party to represent them in the government, the elections must be free and fair. Free and fair means without any malpractices, the elections must take place. Then only a genuine candidate can be elected by the people and he can represent in the government. And elections in which any party or individual can compete and no party has any special advantage. These are called free and fair elections. And in many countries like USSR, Myanmar or Libya, only one or two parties contest in the elections. They contest and they compete with each other, and as such people have very limited choice to vote for them. But in democracies there is multi-party system. Multi-party system means more than one party. Candidates, they contest in the elections and they have a wider choice here. And without malpractice, if elections take place, that is called as free and fair elections. Now let us see what are these malpractices. Using government vehicles to force the voters to vote for their party, rigging, bribing, removing the names of the supporters of the opposition parties from electoral roll. All these are some of the malpractices. And if elections take place without these malpractices, they are called free and fair elections. And this requires civil liberties again. If there is respect for civil liberties, free and fair elections can be held easily in the country. Now, democracy requires respect for law and minority opinion. Now, let us see. Democracy does not mean rule by popular leaders who do what their supporters want them to do. Democracy means it is not ruled by popular leaders. All the democratic governments should follow the laws and also should allow independent functioning of judiciary as well as the executive without bringing any sort of pressure on them. All the democratic governments, they should follow the laws and also should allow independent functioning of judiciary as well as the executive without bringing any sort of pressure on them. Democracies should consider the opinion of not only the majority but also the minority. I hope you know minority. I told you many a times, people who are less in population, they are called minority. So in democracies, the government should consider the opinion of not only the majority but also the minority, because minorities also have the right to express their opinions. And it is the responsibility of the government to respect the opinion of the minorities also. Now, if a party is repeatedly voted to power, suppose every time in the elections, after 5 years again the same party comes to power, after another 5 years again the same party is voted to power. If a party is repeatedly voted to power, does it mean that people really want it to come to power? Or that there is no other alternative? So the people have elected the same party? Or that people are not allowed to vote for any other party? For these questions, the answer is negative only. No. Does it mean that people really want it to come to power? No. Always people don't want the same party to come to power. And not because that there is no other alternative, people are voting for that party. It may be because of malpractices that the party is coming to power. Now let us see a few examples here. Since its independence Mexico got independence in 1930, and since then, for every 6 years, after every 6 years, elections are held in Mexico to elect the president. And Mexico was never under the rule of military or dictatorship. Until 2000, every election was won by a party which was called PRI. PRI means Institutional Revolutionary Party. From 2000 onwards, every election was won by the PRI party. Opposition parties contested in the elections. There were opposition parties also which contested in the elections, but they never managed to win the elections. Always the PRI party used to win. Do you know how? The PRI was known to use many unfair means to win elections. It followed many malpractices, many unfair means to win the elections. Like teachers of government schools, they were forced to ask the parents to vote for the PRI. The government, the PRI party, used to ask the teachers of the government schools to force the parents to vote for the PRI party. Like that, many malpractices used to take place, and thus PRI party used to win the elections every time. And the second example is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, it was also colonized by the Britishers, and it got independence in 1980. And since then, the country has been ruled by a party called ZANU-PF. The full form of ZANU-PF is Zimbabwe African National Union People's Front. Zimbabwe African National Union People's Front. And this ZANU-PF party led the freedom struggle in Zimbabwe, and its leader was Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe was the leader of ZANU-PF, and this party only got freedom for Zimbabwe. And since independence, Robert Mugabe has been ruling the country. And elections are held regularly and at regular intervals, and every time the elections are won by this ZANU-PF party only. President Mugabe, he is popular. Do you know what for? For using many unfair practices in elections. He is very popular. And his government has changed the constitution many a times to increase the powers of the president and make him less accountable to the people. The constitution has been changed by Robert Mugabe many a times to increase the powers of the president and also to make him less accountable to the people. And opposition party workers, they are harassed by ZANU-PF, and they are not allowed to hold their meetings also. The meetings are disrupted. And the government brought a law that limits the right to criticize the government. That means people do not have the right to criticize the president also in Zimbabwe. And television channels and radio, they are controlled by the government. That means whatever is in favor of the ruling party, that only is broadcast by the television or radio. And likewise, newspapers are also under the control of the government. Whatever is in favor of the ruling party, that news is only published by the newspapers. And thus Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF was able to win the elections every time. Recently, 2 years back only, this Mugabe passed away. Till then he was ruling. And third example is in China. In China is a communist country. Elections are held regularly after every 5 years for electing the country's parliament. The China's parliament is called as National People's Congress. And this National People's Congress has the power to appoint the president of the country. And it has nearly 3,000 members elected from all over China. And some members are elected by the army also. And to contest in the elections, it is compulsory to get the approval of the Chinese Communist Party. Any party should get the approval of the Chinese Communist Party. China became a communist country in 1949, let me remind you. And only those who are members of Chinese Communist Party, they can contest in the elections. And the government is always formed by the Communist Party. Because there is only one party, Communist Party, always the same party forms the government. That means it comes to power. So in this way we have seen 3 examples. In all the 3 examples, Mexico, Zimbabwe and China also, the same party comes to power every time. It is not because there are no other opposition parties. And it is not because the people really want that party to come to power. Now, we will conclude it here and I will continue in the next part of the lesson.